my name is Matthew Pfeiffer with MattPfeifferCoaching.com. Welcome to my YouTube channel. On this channel, I create videos about toxic, narcissistically abusive relationships. And if you have a question that you would like for me to answer on this channel, send it to justaskmatt at MattPfeifferCoaching.com. Again, that is justaskmatt at MattPfeifferCoaching.com. Just make sure you are very direct and to the point of what your question actually is. And also make sure you keep the email 2 to 3 paragraphs max. And you're also very direct and to the point of what your question actually is. If it's too long, if it's too lengthy, or if I don't understand what you're asking, unfortunately, I will not be able to answer it. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe notification and also hit the bell notification so you're notified each and every time I upload a new video. I upload videos on this channel 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. So with that being said, let's get into this next email. So this email comes from a person who is struggling with going through a breakup with someone who she shares a child with. And this is very common when we're talking about people who are in toxic, narcissistically abusive relationships. So let's talk about it. So this email reads, "Hey Matt, I have a 1-year-old son with someone who I think is a narcissist. I admit I may have some toxic traits. You probably do, and I'm not saying that to get onto you, right? But one of the things that we have to understand is that people that like attracts like, right? Does that mean that you're a narcissist? Does that mean that you're a bad person or anything like that? No, right? When we're talking about toxic traits, what does that mean? It's coming from a very deep-rooted place of insecurity. We have to understand, right? And this is not victim blaming. This is victim empowering. We have to understand that people who are in toxic, unhealthy relationships, right? That you likely lack the ability to set and enforce boundaries. You may lack the ability to respect other people's boundaries, and so these are the type of dynamics that lead people into toxic relationships to begin with, right? It doesn't mean that there's never an excuse for abuse, right? But one of the things we have to understand is that if we find ourselves in toxic relationships, I always compare it to traffic. People hate being in traffic. They complain about being in traffic, and then guess what? They realize that they are also a part of the traffic. Now, with that being said, when you get to a place and you are out of the traffic, you begin to take responsibility, right, for your own insecurities, your own, to avoid traffic. What do? You have to get up earlier. You have to leave a little bit earlier. There's things that you can do to empower yourself to make sure that you don't involve yourself in the traffic to begin with. And that's a lot of what this channel is about. To get out of these type of dynamics, begin to heal yourself, begin to see some of your unhealed trauma and deep-rooted insecurities, begin to deal with it, bring those things up to the surface, deal with them, so then you don't deal with this type of stuff again. So let's get back to this email. I admit that I may have some toxic traits. I went into counseling and he continued to tell me that I was the problem. And he continued, and we're not talking about the therapist here. I believe that this person is talking about their significant other continued to tell them that they were the problem. That in and of itself is a problem also. So this email continues. I ended up moving out because I couldn't handle, this is a very important part of this email. I ended up moving out because I couldn't handle the gaslighting and the blame. So we have a pattern of behavior of gaslighting and someone who is projecting blame onto another person to a point where it was intolerable, where you had to actually move out, right? And by the way that you wrote this email, right, we're not questioning whether or not this is gaslighting. You knew that this person was gaslighting, manipulating, spinning, probably a lot of word salad, a lot of circle talk, right? And obviously a lot of blame. And this email continues, but I have a hard time actually distancing myself. What is that? The trauma bond, right? So we have all the elements of someone who is in a toxic relationship. We have the trauma bond, we have gaslighting, we have, which also goes hand in hand with a lot of manipulative behavior, right? And so let's continue with this email. He agreed to go to counseling all of a sudden, right? So the question here, when we're talking about this type of dynamic, right? Why didn't this person go to counseling when she was there and she was going to counseling? One of the things that happens with people that I work with is that quite often people will say when things are good, but when things are bad, things are really bad, right? When one of the things we have to talk about with toxic versus healthy relationships, both are good when things are good. Anyone can do that, right? But is the person willing to put in the work when things are not so good, right? And this person all of a sudden wants to go to therapy and wants to go to counseling after she's gone. What does that tell you, right? That is manipulative behavior. Here's the reason why. Here's the reason why we can easily detect and easily from that. Obviously, for the person who's in this, and if you're going through this, it's harder to see this type of behavior, but from the outside looking in, here's how we know it's manipulative. This person was manipulative all throughout the relationship. Notice what she said. She left because of the gaslighting, and she left because of the blame, right? All indicative of a manipulative type of person, right? The type of person that when they're not getting their way, right, they all of a sudden they start gaslighting, they start shifting blame. And in this situation, right, this person has left the building, so to speak. Then all of a sudden you see the change in behavior that she likely was asking for from the beginning. This person was so manipulative that even when she was going to therapy, instead of looking at that as a positive, even use that as a point of even more gaslighting, continuing to tell her that she was the problem, rather than actually doing the work. It wasn't until she left. What happened? This person lost control. You see this in this type of dynamic all the time, that once the person actually sets a boundary, once they actually stand up for themselves, then all of a sudden you see this person start to change, right? This isn't real change. So let's continue with this email. He has agreed to go to counseling, but we will probably not end up going. And this is also very indicative of a trauma bond. You already know the answer. You know this person isn't willing to do the work, right? This is just a show. We will probably not end up going. Is it possible to continue a relationship with him, or how can I move on from here? So I never tell people necessarily what to do unless it's an extremely abusive situation. However, right, let's talk about this, right? When you already know you have a pattern of behavior. You have a son with this person. You've been with this person for at least, I would say at least 2 years, because you have a 1-year-old, right? So you have a pattern of behavior. You already said this person was gaslighting. It shifts blame on you, right? Waited until after you left. We have a lot of manipulative behavior in a very short email. So let me ask you this. Do you want to be friends with someone who is controlling, who places blame, who gaslights, who's manipulative, who tries to control you, who is willing to do anything to get their way, right? That's not the type of friend that you're going to want to have. And by the way that you've illustrated this email, you don't really know who is responsible for what. There's a lot of blurred lines in this relationship, right? You're not sure who's responsible for the arguing and for the fights and the gaslighting. And because one of the things that you said is that you're still thinking that you possibly are the problem here, right? Because of the way that you illustrated this email. Not you're able to acknowledge that you have some toxic traits. You're not even sure what those toxic traits are, right? So one of the things that we have to look at in this relationship, right, is look back at the pattern of this relationship, right? This is one of the things I challenge people when I work with them, when I used to work with people one-on-one. Name one time over the course of the relationship that the two of you had any sort of disagreement, that this person was either able to compromise or meet in the middle with you on anything, right? And quite often, more often than not, people are like, no, not one single time that they were able to have a disagreement and they were able to compromise. So when we have that type of pattern of behavior over a stretched long period of time, we know that this person is controlling, right? So this type of dynamic, if you decide to continue to be friends with this person, you have to understand that that level of control is going to continue even after the relationship is over. This friendship and just the same way with him going to therapy is a facade. You can't have abuse without having some good times in between. Abuse doesn't work without some bait. This is the reason you hear me say this all the time. It's the reason why we teach our kids don't take candy from strangers. This person is saying all the right things, right? Probably saying, hey, we can just be friends. I'm going to therapy. I'm going to change, right? But it's likely the same type of behavior that they have been saying, right, all along to continue to get to have your boundaries cave, right? And so you have to understand that you leaving is going to be the biggest disagreement that you possibly could have. And so the manipulative behavior, the gaslighting, the control, them telling you all the right things is going to continue to try to keep the control. So you have to decide whether or not you are going to allow for that person to continue to control and dictate even after the relationship is over. So then part two to that is when you ask the question, how do I move on from here? If you decide to move on, you need a support system. You need to go through a healing process. You need to continue to go to therapy, continue to educate yourself with videos and content like this. You need to also, you have to understand, again, the way that you got into this relationship was because of a deficit, right? Because of a lack of self-love, right? Likely codependent behavior, that sort of thing, right? And so for you to correct it, those are the type of things that you need to heal to be able to move on, right? Especially now that we're hearing some elements of a trauma bond here. And so it's a process. It's a long process. It's a difficult process, which is the reason why a lot of people struggle with it, because the process is long, it's difficult, and it hurts, right? It's painful because at some point in time, these lines were blurred. The lack of boundaries caused blurred lines, and so you literally identify your own identity is locked into this relationship, right? And so it's very difficult to begin to unwind that. So thank you very much for writing in. And again, for those of you who would like to write in, if you have questions for me that you would like for me to answer, send it to justaskmatt@mattpfeiffercoaching.com. Again, that is justaskmatt@mattpfeiffercoaching.com. Keep the email 2 to 3 paragraphs max. Be very direct and to the point of what your question actually is. If it's too lengthy, or if I don't understand what you're asking, unfortunately, I will not be able to get to it. With that being said, thank you guys very much, and I will see you in the next video.